Good morning, Colorado. You are listening to the Daily Sun Up. It's a conversation with the Colorado Sun. I'm team editor David Krause. Before we jump into today's conversation, here is a quick message from our sponsor.
Support comes from Credit Union of Colorado, proud to call Colorado home for more than 90 years. They are a local institution with a track record of showing up for the community and putting people first. Credit Union of Colorado. Honestly good. Learn more at honestlygood.org. Set the summer trend. Electrify your lawn equipment and help reduce harmful ground-level ozone in your Front Range community. Learn more at simplestepsbetterair.org. Got leftover paint taking up space? Recycle it with Paint Care. Paint Care makes it simple and easy for households and businesses to recycle their leftover paint responsibly. Drop it off for free at one of more than 200 sites across Colorado. To learn more, visit paintcare.org.
Now, back to the show.
Hello, Colorado, and thanks for listening in on another Friday conversation with a Colorado author. I'm Kevin Simpson, editor of our Sunlit feature, which every Sunday brings you excerpts and interviews with a wide array of authors. And today, I'm joined by Samuel Marquis, whose recently published historical work, Empire and Frontier, explores the fascinating and really consequential history of late 17th century North America. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. Great to be here.
So we had you on the podcast a little more than a year ago to talk about your book on Captain William Kidd, a distant relative of yours who was also a big part of the goings-on in the late 1600s. But let's first talk about Empire and Frontier separately. It's a sweeping history told from multiple points of view, but give us a brief synopsis of the ground you cover.
So the book is titled Empire and Frontier, Colonel Peter Schuyler and the Valiant Iroquois in King William's War, 1689 to 1701. And so it really covers the same era. I wrote the book because I had so much interesting research material from Captain Kidd, who lived in New York at the same time period and knew Peter Schuyler and all these other people in colonial New York in the 1690s. So this war, King William's War, Captain Kidd was a privateer fighting against the French, who were French Canada, which was called New France at the time. And so Captain Kidd's fighting against them as a privateer, a legally licensed commerce raider. And so he's a naval commander. And Colonel Peter Schuyler's fighting against the French with the Iroquois against New France and their indigenous allies. So King William's War is the first French and Indian War in American history, and the first where England and France are battling over North America for the next 120 years. So it's an incredibly important because all of the subsequent history of the French and Indian Wars and the American Revolution and the War of 1812 were all based on the battle sites, the travel sites, the supply trains, Quebec, Montreal, Albany, the same cities, and in the first French and Indian War, King William's War. So that's why it's a very important war, and every American really should know about it.
Well, so as you said, one of the primary points of view is Colonel Peter Schuyler. And I'll admit, that's a name I'll bet few people learned in their American history classes. I know I didn't, but in the book, you compare him favorably to George Washington in terms of his impact. How significant a figure was he?
Well, the thing is, the Schuyler family is an incredibly well-known family in upstate New York who were early fur trappers in Albany, which was a fur trading outpost in this from the 1625, 1630 throughout the 1600s. So the Schuyler family is very important because, first of all, there was a General Schuyler in the American Revolution who was very famous, who was fighting up. It was replaced by General Gates, who won the Battle of Saratoga, but it was General Schuyler up until then, Philip Schuyler. And then the Schuyler not Thomas Jefferson, but Alexander Hamilton married a Schuyler. So he married into the Schuyler family, which is a very prominent family. So they're actually very well known and historically important. The reason that Colonel Peter Schuyler is known by historians as the George Washington of the late 1600s and early 1700s is because he wore so many hats. Our founding father, George Washington, was a great general, but he also went on into politics and become our first president and served 2 terms. Colonel Peter Schuyler was the head of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs that dealt with all the indigenous tribes, especially the Iroquois in the northeast. So he interacted with all. He was the only one allowed to interact with all of the Native American tribes in the Northeast that included the Iroquois and Mohicans. Second of all, he was the mayor of Albany, which Albany was incredibly important then. It was the outpost that protected New York City from French Canadians attacking, or New France. And then third, he was also the major and later colonel of the militia that fought, was all the frontier army we had, because they didn't put tons of redcoats in America, in the 1600s. King William was fighting the war on the cheap. So it was all American militia that were fighting against French soldiers who were trained, highly trained, top French soldiers. So he also was colonial governor. He was governor twice, interim governor. So he filled in when a governor died or was removed on 2 occasions. So this is a guy who's incredibly important to American history. And again, this is a guy that everyone Americans should know about, but we tend to forget the 1600s. We go from sort of Puritans to Jamestown, and skip to the Revolution, and that's kind of why he's been neglected.
So you mentioned about the Native American tribes. In recent years, there's been much more of certainly an institutional emphasis, like in museums, for instance, on the role of indigenous people in American history, something that's gotten short shrift for ages. But you also focus on some of the people who played prominent roles and on Schuyler's success that leaned heavily into his ability to forge those respectful relationships with the regional tribes. Tell us about a couple of the important indigenous leaders of the time.
Well, I'm going to kind of talk about it related to my book, because there's 3 point of view characters in my book. So I like to have multiple point of view character historical books that are accurate, footnotes, endnotes. I have 70 pages of endnotes and bibliography. So this is a work of scholarship, but it's told in a narrative nonfiction style. So it has 3 points of view. Colonel Peter Schuyler is obviously very important because we have a lot of record on him too. But I also have Lawrence the Mohawk, who was a war captain and prominent diplomat who fought along Schuyler, but was involved in trying to get peace with the northern tribes, the Laurentian Iroquois, who were different from the 5 nations that were fighting on behalf of the British. So Lawrence the Mohawk, there's a prominent statue of him that's in Schenectady, New York, that people really is a big thing for them. And it's in my book too. I went and took a picture of it. So a lot of the photos in the book I took of the Mohawk River Valley, of Lawrence the Mohawk. So he's a great, they call him Lawrence the Mohawk war captain. We don't know his indigenous name, unfortunately, because he went to the Jesuits at first in Canada, but then he came down and was with the Protestant Christians of Albany, New York, Peter Schuyler and them. So the French were obviously, Catholic, with the Jesuits influenced. Further in Albany, there were the Native Americans, to some extent were influenced a little bit by the Protestant culture there. So he came down, Lawrence, and so that's his name that we know. Then there's Hileti van Alinda, who's a biracial Mohawk Dutch woman who was a key interpreter in all the meetings and council meetings that took place always in Albany, by the way, throughout the book. So we have 2 very important indigenous Mohawk characters in the book, and then Colonel Peter Schuyler.
And I want to point out to readers, we have an excerpt coming up on Sunday from the book, and it's a fascinating excerpt. It's lengthy, but it's totally interesting because it recounts in great detail some battles not only the French and the American forces facing each other, but also the indigenous tribes that you mentioned. Tell us a little bit about that battle, if you will, just to kind of set up the excerpt for folks who might want to read it, because it's really a fascinating account.
Yeah, so I trimmed it a little bit because I just wanted to have a great the battle. It's the battles of La Prairie. It's my chapter. I think it's chapter 10 in my book. And so when I grew up, my favorite books were The Last of the Mohicans and Treasure Island. So I've always been inspired by Native American culture, but also, maritime and piracy and sea adventurers, so the battles of La Prairie were fought in August of 1691. Colonel Peter Schuyler and Lawrence were both there fighting the French. And so they attacked outside of Montreal at Fort La Prairie, fought a battle there, defeated the French and their indigenous allies, caught them by surprise. And then, as they were retreating back to get to their canoes on the Chambly River, which is now the Richer River, south of Montreal, southeast of Montreal, they were trying to get to their canoes, but they were cut off by another fort who came from Fort Chambly. So all of a sudden, they fought one battle, defeated the French, and took significant casualties. They won that battle. Schuyler was a good leader, and Lawrence was an amazing war captain. So they won that, and were trying to get to they were cut off by an equal force. So they had fought a bigger force. So they were up against 3-1 numerical odds, and then they were cut off. The other guys had set up an abatis, basically a lot of trees to block the path, and they fought an incredible battle. And so it's very graphic and intense, but that's what it was like. This is the real frontier. And so this battle in August of 1691 was one of the most intense battles of the four French and Indian Wars. And, the numbers weren't, like they were in Europe or even the American Revolution, but still, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of guys fighting in the woods, hand to hand with tomahawks, scalping knives, muskets. I mean, it is an intense battle. So, I mean, and I try to get it accurate, all the numbers, all the how it was laid out. Unfortunately, Lawrence's good friend, Onondajuaren, was killed in the battle during one of the frontal assaults. So it was a tragedy for a lot of the Mohawks because, they didn't want to lose warriors. It was very important to them. But this was a major battle. And Schuyler said, we've got to break through this. We have no choice. They've cut us off. If we don't go, we have an army that's twice as big as us in our rear. We have these guys in front of us. We've got to go through them. So it's a great battle, and it's Schuyler rising to the occasion.
Well, the intensity really does come through in your writing. It's a terrific excerpt, and folks, you should really check it out on Sunday. I also wanted to know that we've recently been viewing American history kind of as a block of 250 years now, with our anniversary here, dating back to 1776. But, as you alluded earlier, there was a lot going on before that. I wonder if you could kind of put in context for us how that century leading up to American independence sort of set the table for what was to come. You mentioned, a lot of influences in terms of certainly the military and political aspects.
Yeah, and I think, we always have to make sure that we give credit to, the people of the First Nations. Native Americans were here first. So all of the indigenous tribes of the Northeast, they were here 10,000 years ago. So they had established communities. There were hundreds of tribes throughout North America, Central America, South America. So the Dutch came to New York in the 1620s. So around 1625, New Amsterdam, was New York City was New Amsterdam, and New Netherlands was New York. So the Dutch started it in 1664. The British took over, attacked, but in a peaceful takeover, they drove away Peter Stuyvesant, old Pegleg, who was the Dutch governor of New York, of New Amsterdam at that point. And so they took over in 1664. So the British and had already, they attacked from Puritan New England too. So they were really, a lot of them were Puritan New Englanders who were pushing aside Dutch Calvinists who had had a foothold in New York and then Albany. So their fur trading empire kind of spread. Now the Dutch were much more peaceful than the English, the French, and the Spanish were much more imperialistic. Peter Schuyler was Dutch. He was a Dutch American. He's born in America. So he's American born Dutchman. And they were much more peaceful on their approach, at least once they got outside of the immediate area of Manhattan, and striking a deal, the covenant chain in the 1670s with the Iroquois, who were, the Haudenosaunee. So that's the name that they like to call themselves. And so the Iroquois, though, basically struck a deal with New England, New York, Virginia, and as fur traders, but there was an alliance because the Dutch are the ones who started it all, because they were like, well, we don't want to fight you, we want to trade with you, and we want to set up relationships, and we want you not to attack us, and we won't attack you, and we want peace. We want to work together. So that really forged. New York is different than the other colonies. Jamestown, again, they're all attacking the Native Americans. The Puritans were the most brutal of all. Because they thought they were satanic pagans, so they would just kill them on sight. So they were not good at all. The Dutch were, they weren't perfect. Let's not make them, too touchy feely, but they were much better, I think, in everything I've come across in their treatment towards Native Americans. So that all of those again, we are spreading west and spreading north. But some communities are more forging alliances with Native Americans, and the Dutch of Albany were one of those groups.
Well, one of the great things about your books, Sam, is the particular slices of history that you choose that maybe are a bit off the beaten path, so to speak. And you've got one coming out next spring that explores Benjamin Franklin in a context that I had never heard before. Tell us about Franklin's Sea Warriors, which I believe is slated for release next May?
Yes, it will be. So my next book, I've done a lot on. I've written 2 books now on sort of maritime, culture. So I wrote a book on Blackbeard, who was a bona fide pirate, and then I wrote a book on Captain Kidd, who was a privateer. He was a legally licensed, not a pirate, privateer who attacked the French and fought bravely. He was the trusty and well-beloved Captain William Kidd of King William III of England. So, and that's something George Washington always wanted to be, one of the king's men fighting as an officer, but they would never allow him. Whereas Captain Kidd is the trusty and well-beloved Captain William Kidd. So I've written these 2 books on maritime history, and I wanted to kind of explore. So I stumbled across Franklin when he was, for 9 years was in Paris trying to get the French to join the war and support us, because we knew the American Revolution, we weren't going to win without French support, French munitions, gunpowder, weapons, supplies, tents, everything. So he was there in 1776 is the opening scene of my book. And he also, when he was there, he was trying to get French aid, but he was Admiral Franklin. He was in charge of John Paul Jones, Gustavus Conyngham, Luke Ryan, who was an Irish smuggler who went and fought for America. All these guys are just sticking it. They're just kicking butt on Great Britain. They're attacking them on the shores. They're attacking them at sea. And Admiral Franklin, old Ben Franklin's in charge of it all. So, I mean, it's incredible. And he treated these guys like sons. These are his sons. He loved these guys like his own sons. So it hasn't been completely overlooked, but it's usually just a chapter in a book. So I took the whole thing, and it's Franklin and it's Sea Warriors. And I really have, 5 point of view characters, at least on the American side. And then there's Vergent, who's the French foreign minister, who's very important. He basically is the one who single-handedly got us all the aid that helped America win the revolution.
Right.
So it's our Sea Warriors who were really taking the fight to Great Britain. And the newspaper articles, people are up in arms. So it divided the country. It undermined British shipping. It raised insurance rates. So these Sea Warriors of Franklin, so they were in the European theater, the Caribbean theater, and the North American theater. They won the revolution just as much as George Washington and his Continental Army. But people don't know it, but they will after they read my book.
Well, it's always interesting talking to you. I always feel like I come away and I've learned something. So we've been talking with Samuel Marquis, author of Empire and Frontier. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've got an excerpt on the author Q&A where you can find out more about Samuel coming up this Sunday in Sunlit. So be sure to check that out. Thanks so much for joining us, Sam.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kevin. It's been great fun.
And thank you, listeners, for spending part of your day with the Daily Sun-Up. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for listening. And finally, here are a few stories that you should know about today.
Public health officials in Colorado are tying more than 100 cases of salmonella to 2 popular restaurant chains. The State Department of Public Health and Environment said contaminated jalapeno peppers served at Chipotle and Qdoba were the source of the outbreak. The peppers, grown in Mexico, have since been removed and the restaurants are considered safe. Colorado's largest reservoir is facing critically low water levels this summer. The trouble at Blue Mesa Reservoir west of Gunnison is raising fears about water and renewable power supplies across the West. In some places, the receding water line has even revealed the foundations of old buildings torn down to create the reservoir. Colorado voters will decide in November whether to put a right to natural gas in the state constitution. Initiative 177 seeks to prevent state and local bans or limits on natural gas sales and use in Colorado. It would also overturn any existing laws or regulations to that effect. It needs 55% of the vote to pass.
To read these stories and much more, visit our website, coloradosun.com. As an award-winning nonprofit news outlet, we take our mission of credible, independent journalism seriously, and you can check out our trust indicators at coloradosun.com/ethics. Our music is by the Denver-based Matt Skellinger Group. A link to their music is in our show notes, and a special thanks to Swallow Hill Music. I'm David Krause. See you next time.